If all of us decide that we have a position on something, sure, it makes a difference. When we took positions in the Uruguay round on issues which were being negotiated, trade and services, intellectual property, trade-related investment measures, sure, the world took up. And you said, Ambassador, you used the word force. It's not only a force, we deliver, where India and Pakistan work together. And that's the spirit, I think, which we need to capture on a host of other areas as well.
Let's turn to the other neighbor of India, which is China. There is an impression in some American circles that India is a counterweight to China. Now, that needs to be analyzed a bit more deeply, because there's no doubt that China is 1.2 or 1.3 billion people working very hard. So is India, very large critical mass of people working very hard. But there is competition in the production of similar goods at similar costs between India and Pakistan.
And China.
Now, India and China. And so in an extended time frame, how do you see that relationship between a China that is expanding its market share in the world and an India which is also seeking to expand its market share in the world? And so there has to be some degree of competition. What will be the future of that competition?
First, let me share with you the facts as I see them. These are two unequal situations. China is what, a $5 trillion economy? India is a $1 trillion economy going on to become a $2 trillion economy in 2013. If we continue the present rate of growth, which is predicted at 9% plus, we should be $2 trillion in 2013. By that time, China would have gone way ahead. Ambassador, China is the world's second largest economy today. It has overtaken Japan. China is a very prominent and aggressive exporter. I don't want to go into why that is so. My own assessment is that the emphasis on exchange rate and other things is only a partial explanation. The Chinese were able to accomplish something which I think the rest of us had no clue. And I was, incidentally, the person who initiated the bilateral contacts between India and China, which resulted in China's membership of the WTO. I was a young first secretary in Geneva, and goes back a long way. China became a member of the WTO. The international community extracted a fairly heavy price in terms of what China was asked to put on the table. But the Chinese were able to take those obligations which it assumed, and yet it was able to organize itself very effectively to be a major player in the exporting, in exports. India, on the other hand, and China was able to keep costs down. If you look at what dumping means, and I'm choosing my words very carefully, it means you're selling below normal value, which means if the cost of production of this glass is $1, you can sell it below the nominal value. Now, in China, prior to the WTO days, no one knew whether there was a subsidy or not, or whether there was a subsidy and whether subsidy stopped and the dumping started. Subsidy is a government thing. There has to be a payout from the exchequer. Dumping, on the other hand, is an enterprise function, and company can dump its product. Governments don't dump products. Governments provide incentive. There was no understanding of how the Chinese did, but it's a brilliant operation. The Chinese got themselves organized, and that the rest of the world kept complaining. Now the rest of the world is complaining because, you know, the Chinese economy is shooting up, and they're saying it's Chinese exchange rate. I don't want to get into that, because you could have a long discussion on that, and I'm not sure both of us would even have the full facts on what is happening. Fact is, China has arrived on the international economic scene. My first submission is India has a long distance to go, number one. Number two, in the kind of cooperation that is existing, I think there is enough space there for both China and India. And this is something which my Prime Minister says all the time, and I completely endorse that. Are we producing the same goods at the same price? I'm not so sure with that statement. What is happening is China started, let me give you textiles and clothing. When the MFA, multi-fiber arrangement, was being withdrawn, I remember a lot of Indian companies telling me that they thought that the Indian and the Pakistani negotiators in Geneva had gone mad. They said this quota system is very good because quotas provide security of for access, guaranteed access. If I have a quota, the other guy can't get into my quota. I can, drive the price up within my quota, and I can, what they call rentier income. And I kept telling them, but if you're going to do economic diplomacy along these lines, you are stamping yourself with servitude for the rest of your lives. You have to think ahead. No, China will swamp everybody. I said, yes, they will, up to a point, but then prices in China will go up, and that's exactly what's happening. Chinese took advantage, Chinese did very well, but then that forced your and my industry to wake up. We had to get modern equipment in, we had to become more innovative, and things are tamed. I am not prepared to believe that any country can continue to produce large amounts at low this thing, because that presumes that there won't be labor problems there. People will not ask for more money up the value chain. So the world is changing. But as I said, China is way ahead just now. You asked me only questions on economics. If you were to ask me a question on how does that translate into a political China, I would have some interesting things to ask you in return.
To ask me in return?
Yes, because we're having a conversation. It's not that me...
But no, we need to go deeper into China, because China has a philosophy of Confucianism which is important, because it gives it discipline, it gives it hard work, it gives it a lot of obedience and respect to vertical structure. India does not have that. And so, because India is a very highly politicized country, the population is 1.1 billion, and there are 1.1 billion political parties in India. Everybody is a political party. Probably more. Some people have schizophrenic opinions. And so, the question is, and yet, India has a past. That 250 years ago, India was a superpower. It was the superpower of the world in the 17th century. It occupied the same position in the world as the United States occupies today. And then we went into the colonial period when the mosquitoes from Britain came and sucked all the blood out of India.
I hope for the record, those are terms that Ambassador Kamal uses, not me. Because
Thank you for that. But that created a very unusual situation. The money was reasonably well distributed in the world 250 years ago. You had India as a superpower. You had empires in Africa, the empire of Benin. You had the Incas in Latin America. So money was very well distributed. And then following colonialism, money has been badly distributed. It has congregated in North America, Western Europe, and Japan. And so the question really is, how do you see the re-equilibration of that situation in, not in a post-colonial, but in a new situation where you have an India with its base in mathematics and its DNA as being a past superpower, and a China which is working very hard. And so you're going to get an entirely new world emerging in the next 5, 10, 20 years. How do you see your role? Well, not just India, but also India plus China.
Well, first of all, there are some presumptions, Ambassador. I see this, where you're coming from and where you're headed. But I would have a lot of difficulty in accepting a statement that the Chinese are basically Confucian today. I think the Chinese are today like anyone else, depending which Chinese you're talking about. That India has this concept of the past. I don't think so. I think if you look at a poor landless laborer in Bihar, in one of the districts, who has to migrate to as